Can you believe it's possible for someone to become a famous digital influencer without even knowing what Wi-Fi is? Well, I thought it was impossible when I first heard this story. But get ready, because what you're about to discover may truly surprise you and even completely change the way you view new beginnings in life. We're talking about Margaret, a 78-year-old woman who lived a completely ordinary life, disconnected from the digital world. She had no idea what a hashtag was, never created a story, and even less knew what that magical word everyone uses these days meant, influencer. For her, the internet was something distant, complicated, one of those things that wasn't for her generation. You know, that traditional grandmother who spends her days cooking family recipes, tending the garden, and knitting while watching her favorite soap opera? Well, that's exactly how Margaret lived. Simple, peaceful, but also a little lonely. Now imagine the scene. This same woman, who could barely take a photo with her cell phone, suddenly wakes up one day to discover that millions of people are watching her videos. Millions. People from all over the world commenting, sharing, sending loving messages. Have you ever stopped to think what it would be like to wake up famous overnight without understanding anything about what's going on? Well, that's exactly what happened to Margaret. And do you know what the most incredible part of this whole story is? It all started with a mistake. That's right, a simple mistake any of us could make. It wasn't planned. There was no marketing strategy behind it, no digital consultant coming up with a crazy plan. It was just a genuine, authentic moment captured by chance that touched the hearts of millions of people around the world. Stay with me until the end, because what happened to her will show you that starting over is ageless and that sometimes the best moments in life come when we least expect them. Margaret had no idea what going viral meant. In fact, if you'd asked her that a few months ago, she'd probably have thought it had something to do with the flu or a cold. She lived in her own little analog world, where recipes were handwritten in old notebooks, where conversations took place in person or, at most, over the landline, and where social media was just the knitting club she attended every Thursday with her friends. But life has these unexpected twists and turns, you know? Have you ever been there? That moment when everything changes overnight, and you didn't even see it coming? It was during a seemingly ordinary visit from her teenage granddaughter that the impossible happened. And when I say impossible, believe me, to this day, people wonder how a lady who called Wi-Fi the invisible thread of the internet managed to win over such a legion of adoring fans. The most fascinating thing is that Margaret became a phenomenon precisely because she was who she always was, authentic, unfiltered, unpretentious. While thousands of people study algorithms, invest in expensive equipment, and take endless courses on how to become a social media sensation, she simply existed. And that was enough. In fact, it was much more than enough. But don't worry, because before she became this inspiration to millions of people around the world, before the heartwarming comments and touching messages she receives every day, there was a journey filled with hilarious mishaps, genuine fears, and lessons learned that go far beyond technology. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about now. And before we continue, let me ask you something very simple, but very important. If this story has already awakened something within you, if it reminded you of someone, if it made you think about your own life, or if it gave you the urge to start over, write in the comments what touched you most so far. It could be a memory, a word, or even the name of someone you'd like to hear this message. Do you know why? Because it's your presence here that keeps this chain of inspiration alive. Every comment, every like, every new subscription helps this message reach others who sometimes just need a little push to believe that it's never too late to start over. So take advantage of this moment. Leave your like to show that this story made sense to you, and subscribe to the channel by activating the bell so you can continue walking with me on these journeys that prove that life can begin again at any age. I truly believe in the power of these stories. They heal, inspire, and rekindle hopes that time has nearly extinguished. And when you participate, you don't just watch, you become part of this transformation. Now let's get back to Margaret, because I promised to tell you how it all began. And believe me, the details of this story are even more surprising than you imagine. Remember, I said it was all because of a mistake. So, let me explain exactly what happened on that day that completely changed this 78-year-old grandmother's life. Margaret had a routine that had hardly changed for decades. Every day she would wake up early, prepare breakfast in the same china teapot she'd received as a wedding gift, and begin the day by watering the plants in her garden. That garden was her pride and joy, you know? Roses, geraniums, hydrangeas, each flower bed tended with a dedication only those who truly love can muster. After the garden came the kitchen. Ah, the kitchen. It was there that Margaret spent much of her day, preparing recipes she learned from her mother and grandmother, recipes that had spanned generations and carried stories in every ingredient. She had been a widow for 5 years. After her husband passed away, the house felt different, quieter. Her children had their own lives, lived far away, visited when they could, but you know how it is. Modern life takes its toll, and distances seem ever greater. Margaret didn't complain, but loneliness knocked on her door every day. She filled the void with knitting, soap operas, endless recipes, and sporadic conversations with her neighbors. It was a simple, peaceful life, but there was an invisible weight to that routine that repeated itself without much emotion. The cell phone her children had given her for her last birthday sat there, practically untouched. Margaret barely knew how to unlock the screen. She used it only to answer calls, and that was that. Text messages? Forget it. Photos? Only if someone took them for her. Technology was a completely alien, almost threatening world. She belonged to the generation of handwritten recipe books, mailed letters, and face-to-face conversations. And she was perfectly comfortable like that, or at least that's what she told herself. But there's something fascinating about the human journey that many people forget. Transformation doesn't warn you when it's knocking on your door. It simply arrives, often disguised as chance. Coincidence, one of those small moments we don't even pay much attention to at first. And that's exactly how it was for Margaret. Her life was about to take a completely unexpected turn, and she had no idea. At that very moment, as she kneaded the dough for her famous apple pie and hummed an old song, fate was preparing a twist that would change not only her life, but also touch the hearts of millions. Because the hidden truth behind great new beginnings is this: they rarely seem grand when they begin. Most of the time, they're just small details, seemingly insignificant decisions, silly mistakes that turn into gigantic doors. And Margaret was seconds away from walking through one of those doors, without even realizing it. It was a typical Saturday when her 16-year-old granddaughter, Emma, came to spend the weekend. Emma was the complete opposite of her grandmother. She was glued to her phone, posting stories every half hour, and knew all the latest internet trends before they even went viral. For her, social media was second nature, as natural as breathing. While Margaret was making her famous apple cake in the kitchen, Emma was in the living room recording a video of herself dancing to a popular choreography. But the camera angle also captured the kitchen in the background, and that's when the unexpected happened. Margaret, completely oblivious to the fact that she was being filmed, began dancing alone while mixing the ingredients. It was nothing rehearsed, nothing planned. It was just her, lost in her own thoughts, gently swaying to the beat of an old song playing on the kitchen radio. Her movements were clumsy, genuine, and filled with pure joy. She held the wooden spoon like a microphone, gently rotating it, and then returning to stirring the dough, completely immersed in that moment, all her own. Emma reviewed the video and laughed. She thought it was so cute, her grandmother appearing in the background, so natural, so authentic, without much thought. She posted the video on social media with a simple caption, "My grandma cooking with style." And that was it. She went about her day as usual. It was just another post among hundreds she made every week. There was no pretense, no strategy, no goal of going viral. It was simply a spontaneous moment shared with her followers. But the internet has these inexplicable surprises. When Emma woke up Sunday morning and checked her phone, she nearly dropped it. The video had exploded. 2 million views in, less than 24 hours. The comments kept pouring in. "This grandma is the cutest thing I've seen today. I needed this in my life. Her authenticity is inspiring. Someone protect this lady at all costs." People everywhere were sharing, tagging friends, and saving the video. The hashtag #AuthenticGrandma began to gain traction. Margaret had no idea about any of this. She was in the garden, watering the plants as she did every morning, when Emma came running in with her cell phone in hand, shouting excitedly, "Grandma, Grandma, you're famous!" Margaret looked confused, completely uncomprehending. Famous? What do you mean, famous? Emma tried to explain, showing the numbers, the comments, but to Margaret it all seemed like a foreign language. She couldn't comprehend how something so simple, so trivial, as dancing in her own kitchen could have such a gigantic impact on millions of people she didn't even know. But therein lay the most powerful revelation of this entire journey. People were tired of manufactured perfection, tired of influencers posing, of edited lives, of meticulously planned content. What touched the hearts of millions was precisely the opposite. It was the pure spontaneity of a 78-year-old woman simply being herself, unfiltered, unpretentious, without even knowing she was being filmed. But therein lay the most powerful revelation of this entire journey. People were tired of manufactured perfection, tired of influencers posing, of edited lives, of meticulously planned content. What touched the hearts of millions was precisely the opposite. It was the pure spontaneity of a 78-year-old woman simply being herself, unfiltered, unpretentious, without even knowing she was being filmed. And here begins the funniest and most touching part of this story. Because Margaret, poor thing, didn't understand a thing about what was happening, Emma tried to explain the basics. "Grandma, people liked the video and are commenting, but..." Each word was a new mystery. Margaret looked at those numbers on the screen and asked things like, "But why do these people keep sending me hearts via email? They don't know me." Her granddaughter laughed and tried to explain that it wasn't email, that it was reactions, but Margaret didn't care. It was all a giant technological mess. She started calling her followers the invisible friends. She'd say things like, "Emma, did the invisible friends text again?" with such genuine innocence that even her granddaughter was moved. What's more, Margaret was convinced she had to pay an extra electricity bill every time they recorded a video. She'd argue, "But Emma, if we use internet, someone has to pay for it, right? It should come on the electricity bill." Her mindset was too analogical to process that it worked in a completely different way. Emma realized these misunderstandings were pure gold. She began recording her grandmother's reactions, the absurd questions, the hilarious misunderstandings. In one video, Margaret held her phone sideways and asked, "But how do people get in here to see me? Are they so small?" In another, she blew on the screen as if blowing out candles, thinking that would turn off the video. Each new recording showed Margaret genuinely lost in the digital world, but with a charming willingness to try to understand. The impact of this was surprising. People didn't laugh at her. They laughed with her. The comments were filled with affection. "My grandmother asks the same questions. This reminds me of my mother trying to use her cell phone. Her purity is comforting." Margaret was, unknowingly, breaking down the generational barrier. Young people who had never had the patience to teach their grandparents about technology began to reflect. Older people who were afraid to try new things saw her as an inspiration, proof that it was okay not to understand everything at first. There was a particularly memorable moment when Margaret, after recording a video in the kitchen, looked at Emma and said, "Honey, can you please ask your invisible friends to stop sending you those notifications? It's constantly making noise, and I think I'm going to use up all the internet in the house." Her granddaughter recorded this and posted it. The video received 5 million views in 2 days. Brands began contacting her. Newspapers wanted interviews. And Margaret? She still thought it was all some kind of elaborate prank that would soon end. But behind the scenes of all this confusion, something much deeper was happening. Margaret was, unconsciously, teaching a valuable lesson about vulnerability and learning. She wasn't ashamed to ask questions, to make mistakes, to admit she didn't know. And that, in a world where everyone pretends to know everything, was revolutionary. Comment: I've also confused something technological like that. And tell us what the funniest mix-up you've ever made or seen someone else make was. However, not everything on this journey was laughter and sweet moments. There's a side to the story that few people see, but which is perhaps the most important of all. Margaret began to feel fear. Real, deep, paralyzing fear. The more the videos went viral, the more exposed and vulnerable she felt. At night, lying in bed, she would think, what if I say something wrong? What if people realize I don't know any of this? What if they start laughing at me for real? Insecurity pounded in her chest. Emma noticed the change. Her grandmother, who had previously thought it was all a fun game, began refusing to record new videos. She said she was tired, that she needed to tend to the garden, and made excuses. But the underlying truth was different. Margaret was terrified of not being good enough. She saw other people on social media, all young, all confident, all knowing exactly what to do. And her? A 78-year-old woman who could barely unlock a cell phone. This isn't for people my age, she repeated to herself like a self-sabotaging mantra. There was one day when she almost gave up completely. Emma had suggested doing a live stream, a live broadcast where Margaret could chat with her followers in real time. The mere idea made her heart race with anxiety. Live? Me? Talking to millions of people? Emma, are you crazy? The internal resistance was overwhelming. Margaret felt like she was being pushed into an abyss with no safety net. It was too big, too scary, beyond what she thought she could handle. And here's the part many people don't tell you about new beginnings. They hurt, they scare, they make us question whether we're truly capable. Margaret spent sleepless nights ruminating over negative thoughts. They'll find out I'm a fraud. They'll find out I'm nothing special. I'll make a fool of myself in front of everyone. Her mind conjured up catastrophic scenarios, each one more terrifying than the last. Emma, sensing her grandmother's emotional state, sat down with her one Sunday afternoon. She held her hands and said, "Grandma, you don't have to be perfect. People don't love you because you know everything. They love you because you, because you are real." Margaret listened, but wasn't sure she believed her. The fear of disappointment, of failure, of not living up to expectations was paralyzing. But there's something curious about fear. Sometimes it's precisely the sign that we're on the right path. Because if it didn't matter, we wouldn't be afraid. If it weren't significant, we wouldn't feel so vulnerable. And there, in the midst of that internal crisis, something small began to whisper inside Margaret. A timid, almost imperceptible voice that said, "What if this is exactly for you? What if your age is precisely your greatest asset? What if the world needs to see that starting over is possible at any time? What if the fear of not being enough was just a disguise for the desire to be authentic?" Comment below. What fear would you need to overcome to start something new today? It was this voice that led Margaret to a crucial decision. She wouldn't give up, but she also wouldn't pretend to be someone she wasn't. Emma proposed something different. "Grandma, let's take it slow. You don't have to learn everything at once. Let's do it your way, in your own time." And so, with small steps, the real learning began. Margaret decided she would record only when she felt comfortable doing what she already knew how to do: cooking, tending to plants, living her normal life. The transformation happened organically. Margaret began recording herself preparing her recipes, narrating the steps with that sweet, calm voice she always had. There was no script, no rehearsal. She simply shared. "I learned this recipe from my mother when I was 10 years old," she would say, as she kneaded bread dough. Back then, there were no electric mixers. Everything was done by sheer force. The stories flowed naturally, intertwined with the ingredients. Emma set up her phone so her grandmother could record alone without needing help. At first, Margaret would accidentally turn on the camera, film the ceiling, or forget to press the red button. But little by little, at her own pace, she got the hang of it. Not technically and perfectly, but functionally and authentically. And you know what happened? People loved it even more. The mistakes, the mix-ups, the videos where she forgot she was recording and talked to herself, all of this became part of the charm. There was one particular video that marked this learning phase. Margaret was in the garden, showing off her roses, when she began to tell a story from her youth. She talked about how she met her husband, about their first date at a community dance, about how he stepped on her foot while dancing, and she pretended it didn't hurt. The narration was so genuine, so full of emotion and longing, that millions of people watched with tears in their eyes. There was no professional editing, no beauty filters, no planned background music. It was just Margaret, the garden, and a 50-year love story. The impact was profound. While the social media world was saturated with overproduced content, perfectly lit and intricately edited, here was a woman demonstrating that true connection doesn't require any of that. She was proving, video after video, that true gold lies in authenticity. Brands began offering partnerships, but Margaret declined most of them. "I'll only talk about products I actually use," she said with surprising firmness. Emma realized something fascinating. Her grandmother was teaching not just about technology, but about life, about how learning doesn't mean mastering everything perfectly, but rather finding your own path, about how courage isn't the absence of fear, but moving forward despite it. Margaret was transforming herself not into a digital expert, but into something much more valuable, herself, only amplified. But what really touched Margaret was when she started reading the comments. Emma had avoided sharing them at first, afraid the criticism would hurt her grandmother. But when they finally sat down together to read them, something extraordinary happened. Margaret discovered she was touching lives in ways she never imagined possible. The comments weren't just superficial compliments. They were profound confessions, emotional outpourings, revelations about the real impact she was making. A 22-year-old woman wrote, "I lost my grandmother 2 years ago, and watching your videos makes me feel like she's still here with me. Thank you for existing." Margaret read this and had to pause, her eyes welling up. She had never imagined that something as simple as sharing her routine could fill such a void in someone's life. Another comment read, "I'm 17 and lost in life. Your cooking advice calms me in a way nothing else can." It was surreal for her to understand that her words, those stray phrases, uttered while preparing a recipe, carried so much weight. The comments revealed a genuine connection that went far beyond numbers and views. People of all ages found something special in Margaret. Young adults who no longer had grandparents nearby saw her as a nurturing mother figure. Elderly people who thought it was too late to try new things sent messages saying, "If you could do it at 78, I'll try at 65. Mothers wrote to say they watched the videos with their young children, teaching them about respect for their elders. The diversity of the audience was impressive. Margaret was unwittingly becoming a bridge between generations. In a world where young and old often live in separate bubbles, she created a space where everyone could come together. Her videos were shared in family groups, watched in nursing homes, sent by children to distant parents. She wasn't just another influencer vying for attention. She was a refuge, a safe place where people could slow down, breathe, and connect with something genuine. There was one comment in particular that completely changed Margaret's perception of what she was doing. A middle-aged man wrote, "My mom is 75 and always said she was too old to learn new things. I showed her your videos. Today she made her first post on her own. You can't imagine the gift you gave me by giving me back my mom excited about life." Margaret read it 3 times. She understood then that she wasn't just creating content. She was inspiring real, tangible transformations in entire families. The truth is, Margaret offered something the digital world was desperate to find: humanity, vulnerability without drama, wisdom without arrogance, joy without artificiality. And people recognized this instinctively. They didn't come for the gimmicks, the edits, the trends. They came for the feeling of being in the kitchen with their own grandmother, listening to stories while the smell of baking filled the house. 8 months had passed since that first accidental video. Margaret now looked at her phone and saw a number that seemed unreal: 4 million followers. 4 million people following the life of a woman who still called airplane mode, turning off the internet in the sky. But do you know what was most fascinating? These numbers weren't what really mattered to her. The real transformation was happening in places much deeper than statistics could measure. Margaret woke up differently now. It was no longer the mechanical awakening of someone facing another day like the one before. She opened her eyes, already thinking about what she would record, what recipe she would share, what story from her youth her invisible friends would like to hear. The house, which had previously breathed solitude, came alive again. The sound of her voice echoed through the rooms again, not just in silent monologues, but in animated conversations with a camera that represented millions of attentive ears. Her relationship with technology changed completely. Emma taught her grandmother how to make video calls, and Margaret, who had previously avoided it as if it were witchcraft, now called her children almost every day. She watched her grandchildren grow up in real time, participated in meals remotely, and relived her longing without having to wait months for the next visit. One of her sons, who lived hours away, commented emotionally, "Mom, it's been years since I've seen you so alive." And it was true. Margaret had rediscovered something she thought she'd lost forever: enthusiasm. But the transformation wasn't just hers. The entire house reflected this change. The garden gained new beds because she wanted to showcase the process of planting from scratch. The kitchen was reorganized to facilitate filming. Margaret bought a beautiful notebook where she jotted down video ideas, special comments she received, recipes her followers requested. That routine that once seemed purposeless now had direction, meaning. Each day was an opportunity to create something, to connect, to matter. The most profound impact, however, was on her mindset. Margaret always carried that limiting belief that certain things weren't for people her age, that there was an expiration date on dreams, on experiments, on relevance. But there she was, at 78, proving to herself and to millions of people that age really is just a number. She didn't rejuvenate. She didn't pretend to be young. She simply embraced the possibility of starting over, being exactly who she was. There was a memorable moment when Margaret was in the garden, recording, and stopped mid-sentence. She looked into the camera with those experienced eyes and said, "You know, I spent so long thinking my life was already over, that the good parts were in the past, but look where I am now, 78 years old and learning more than I did in the last 20. This video went viral for a reason. It touched on a wound that many people carry, the idea that there's a time limit on how long we can live fully. But there's something even deeper to this whole story that needs to be said. Margaret didn't become an inspiration because she mastered algorithms, because she understood SEO, because she studied growth strategies. In fact, she barely knew what those words meant. What she did was something much more powerful and, ironically, much simpler. She was authentic. And therein lies the most important lesson she taught the entire world. Think about it for a second. We live in an era where millions of people invest fortunes in courses, equipment, consultants, all to try to stand out on social media. They study every detail, every trend, every metric. And then a 78-year-old woman arrives who doesn't even know what Wi-Fi is and makes millions simply by being herself. Isn't that ironic? Doesn't it reveal something fundamental about what truly matters when we talk about human connection? Margaret proved a truth. Many people have forgotten. You don't have to be perfect to touch hearts. In fact, it's quite the opposite. The imperfections, the mistakes, the unplanned moments are what create real connection. When she forgot she was recording and started talking to herself, when she spilled flour on the floor, when she laughed at her own technological blunder, people didn't see flaws. They saw humanity. They saw someone real, tangible, relatable. Her journey taught us that authenticity always trumps perfection. Always. It may take a little longer. It may not follow the conventional path, but ultimately, what sticks in people's memories aren't the videos with the best lighting or impeccable editing. What sticks are the moments when we feel like we truly know the person on the other side of the screen. Margaret delivered this in every second of her content. Another powerful lesson lay in her courage, because let's be honest, taking the first step when you're completely outside your comfort zone is terrifying. Margaret had every reason in the world to give up. Her age, her lack of technical knowledge, her fear of judgment, her insecurity. But she took the step, even though she was trembling, even though she doubted, even though she thought she would fail. And that's exactly what makes her story so inspiring. She didn't wait until she was ready, because she never would be. She simply started. And perhaps the most beautiful revelation of all is this: the best stories in our lives, the ones truly worth telling, often begin with fear. They begin with insecurity. They begin with that voice in your head telling you you can't do it. But if you take the first step anyway, even with all that weighing you down, then the magic happens. Margaret had no idea she would inspire millions. She just had enough courage to try. Comment below. What would your first step be if fear weren't in the way? Tell us. maybe someone will give you that little push you needed. And where is Margaret? Today? Well, let me tell you the outcome of this story that sounds like a movie script, but it's real and happening now. Margaret is still Margaret, with all her adorable mishaps. She still calls stories temporary stories, still asks if she needs to save internet when recording longer videos, still has that unique way of mixing tech terms with her own invented language. And you know what? No one wants that to change, because that's exactly what makes her special. Her impact was so great that Margaret became a role model for something completely unexpected. She began teaching other seniors how to use social media, not in a technical way, full of complicated jargon, but in her own patient and welcoming way. She makes specific videos showing the step-by-step process, always with that tone of someone talking to a dear friend. Look, honey, don't be afraid of this little button here. Just press it and you're recording, she says with a sweetness that disarms any resistance. Thousands of older people, inspired by her, have taken their own first steps into the digital world. But Margaret's journey went beyond the screen. She released a cookbook that became a bestseller within weeks. It wasn't just a regular cookbook. Each recipe was accompanied by a story, a memory, a slice of her life. People bought it not just for the recipes, but for the feeling of leafing through an intimate diary, full of wisdom and affection. The book brought her an income she never imagined she would have at that stage in her life, but more importantly, it brought her a sense of fulfillment, of purpose fulfilled. Margaret also started doing weekly live streams. In the beginning, Emma had to help set everything up. Today, she still needs help, but much less. The live streams have become an event that thousands of people eagerly await. There, live, unedited, without a safety net, Margaret talks about everything: cooking, answering questions, giving advice, telling stories. And the best part? She doesn't feign expertise. When she doesn't know something, she admits it. When she makes a mistake, she laughs at herself. This constant vulnerability is what keeps people coming back. The most beautiful legacy Margaret is building, however, isn't in the numbers, the book sales, or the followers. It's in the daily messages she receives from people saying, "I started over because of you." It's in the elderly who have started to dream again. It's in the young people who have learned to value their elders. It's in the families who have reconnected, inspired by her story. Margaret has become a living symbol that starting over has no expiration date, that relevance knows no age, that impact is independent of perfection. As she herself likes to say, with that sweet smile, "If I can do it, you can too, dear." And look, if you've made it this far with me, to the end of this whole story, I really want to thank you, because it shows that you're not just another person swiping. You stopped, paid attention, and connected with something real. And that means a lot. So leave a comment here and write, "This message was for me." That way I know you're also on this journey of believing that it's never too late to start over. If this story touched you in any way, if Margaret inspired you even a little, please like the video. This helps me understand that this type of content resonates with you and motivates me to continue bringing you more stories like this, ones that go beyond the superficial and truly make us reflect on life. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, subscribe now, because we don't just bring you empty entertainment. We bring you real stories from real people who prove that transformation is possible at any age, at any time. And you deserve to have this kind of content in your daily life, the kind that truly adds something. Now there's a video right here that will show you another incredible story of someone who also started over when everyone thought it was impossible. Click there and stay with me, because the conversation doesn't end here. See you in the next video.